All right, welcome everyone to the May version of the Alliance for Peacebuilding's Community of Practice in Digital Peacebuilding. We meet monthly on the third Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Today, we're very lucky to have with us Andrew Konya, who has spent the past decade, 15 years, developing and applying machine learning to problems in material science, biosensing, traffic, image analysis, language, market research, and peacebuilding. In 2013, he founded Remash to build AI for engaging and understanding populations, where he currently serves as CEO. He spends his free time making art and thinking about the future of representative intelligence. And I'm really excited about this form of peace tech or technology for peace building. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Andrew.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Lisa, and thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us today and let me talk a little bit about what we're working on. Maybe preface all of this with a little overt humility here, which is to say my background prior to working on any of this was theoretical physics. My full-time job is running Remash as a company, and it is as part of that that I get the pleasure to be able to work on these problems that intersect with our technology and peacekeeping. And I'll note the reason I jumped from physics to this world at all was I started becoming obsessed with how conflict resolution worked in a specific conflict in the Middle East where I had friends on either side. And as a PhD student going through existential crisis, I thought I could actually do something impactful about it. As we'll note kind of here is the punchline of the story, that was back in 2012. We didn't actually make any meaningful impact in anywhere at all for almost a decade. So there's maybe a lesson there in how hard peace building really is and how much there is to learn. And I take that as an indicator of how much is left to learn that probably I don't know. So I kind of want to asterisk all of this with not an expert in peace building, just a person trying to learn and build tech in it and apply it better. So plan here today is I'm gonna first introduce you to Remash. Think of it, some people think of it as a technology, some people think of it as a product, some people think of it as a platform, some people think of it as a methodology. So I want to walk you through what it is. I want to actually show you the product so that you can get a visceral sense of what it's like. In the context of peace building, people talk about us in terms of collective dialogue or digital dialogues. And so I'll use that phrase and terminology as we go through this. And so what we'll do is we'll actually have a very short and brief digital or collective dialogue with a group of strangers on the internet, just so that you can see what it's like in practice. Then I'll give you a little bit of a rundown on our work with the UN. Give you kind of the general formula we see in terms of how people execute collective dialogues for the purpose of inclusivity in conflict scenarios. And then maybe leave it a little open-ended. I can talk about a few of the specific things we've seen in specific missions, but we'll then maybe open it up to some QA. So that is the plan. So I want to begin by introducing Remash as a paradigm. So you think of the tech that we do as representative intelligence. So think of that as AI applied for understanding and representing people. And our obsession is to use it to scale collective dialogue. And what we mean by scale is that we want to take the natural open-ended back and forth that is so easy yet so important between two individual people. That thing that lets you ask a question, learn something unexpected, and then follow up based on what you just learned. Except we want to be able to do it at the scale that is necessary to represent a large body of people. And in our case, we think of that as, let's call it hundreds or thousands of people at least that we're going to need to be able to represent them. Those of you who have any familiar with market research, market researchers think of us as being like qual and quant put together. I've heard this phrase used a lot, which is like Remash is like a focus group at survey scale. The focus group being it's live and natural language and open-ended and back and forth. The survey scale being the doing it with hundreds or thousands of people simultaneously part. Now, obviously, the hard part of this problem is how do you actually represent hundreds or thousands of people in real time in a world where what you're asking is open-ended questions, and you need to make sense of those in a matter of minutes. And this is where kind of our core focus on our AI comes in. The data that we're going to use during a collective dialogue is for any prompt, for any message that gets sent to the group, everyone is going to respond to it. So we're going to have responses from as many people as we have. And then we're going to have people vote on others' responses. Now, obviously, we can't have everyone vote on everybody's response. Even if we have 100 people, which is what I'll show today, it's not feasible to have each person vote on 100 different things. So what in reality we get is a very sparse sampling of what every person's voted. So in this case, I'm using a blue dot here to show we don't have many votes in terms of the overall piece. Then where our tech comes in is to be able to fill in what we're missing. So we use a model that we've developed. We've got a few of these, and I can go in technical details for those interested, but I will breeze over the technical details for the purpose of this. But what it does, you can think of it as a matrix completion model, although it's a little more nuanced than that. And it lets us then predict, based on that small amount of data we do have, how every other person would be likely to vote on every one of those responses within the context of that conversation. So this means while we can only maybe gather 5 to 15, maybe 20 votes per person in that 1 minute or so that we're going to take to ask a question, we can then use that to predict the other 90 or 990 that we'll actually want to within there. I'll caveat that by saying it's about 82% accurate per vote when it predicts it. So it's not perfect, but it is quite good when you start aggregating about 1,000 of those things together. Now, the reason we do this is that we want to understand of all the natural language responses, perspectives that were offered up by participants, we want to know what actually represents either everyone or what represents these different segments of participants that are in our conversation. And so the way that we think about that is what we're aiming to do is get representation that's deeper than just common topics. So we'll show this, and we have it on the platform, but we can say, 10 people mentioned this kind of a topic. But what we found is that you lose a lot of definition, a lot of nuance when you just go, people mentioned the economy versus a verbatim where someone says, my issue with the economy is that we've had roads closed to the airport and we cannot get things. So there's to maintain that nuance, we actually have to predict what verbatims are representative. And you'll see those, we call them quantified verbatims. They are what kind of the primary unit of insight or information in our platform. And then we also can use that same algorithm to generate what we would call representative quotes. This is just a fancy way of saying, if you don't want to read 100 things or 1,000 things, we will try to distill down to the 10 or so that are most representative of that population overall. It's a nuanced algorithm on how to do that, but you can think at least in principle, that is the idea. So all of this goes on then in the form of this live back and forth conversation, though the AI is actually fairly robust. We've spent a lot of money on GPUs and supercomputers. To those who will use our platform, we try to make it as simple as possible. The idea being that it lets you go on, click a few buttons, and have a live conversation with a group of people as if you were having a conversation one-on-one, or maybe a little fancier than that, but in at least that same mode or that same mental model. So that's the basic idea. The paradigm we want to have, or the paradigm we build around, is live natural language back and forth with the population. We open-ended is where we specialize. That's where all the kind of serious AI has to live, though we obviously support much simpler modes of interaction on the platform as well. I'm going to shortly here go over and actually just show you a real conversation in action. Before I do that, I would be remiss not to note while I'm going to show you the live conversation, there is usually a bunch of work that will happen leading up to it and work that will happen after it in order to really get successful outcomes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that once we get there, but let's jump over now into a live conversation. So I think it will start in about 4 minutes. Let me just move this out of my way. So this is a conversation that's about to start. I will note, I'm going to actually join this as a participant so that you can see what it's like to participate. As you join a conversation as a participant, the person setting it up can choose to ask you some demographic questions as you onboard. So in this case, I'm going to give my age, my gender, my political affiliation, and my vaccination status, which we found is the best predictor these days of people's opinions. And now you'll see my conversation is going to start here in about 2.5 minutes. While that's waiting to begin, let me take you over here to show you what the moderator sees. So this is my view as a moderator. Down here is where I'm going to be able to ask things in real time. So I can just type in, say hello, ask questions. These are all the different forms of things that you can send. So you can say something, you can send a poll, you can ask people to rank things, you can ask people their opinions, you can ask them their experiences, or you can send images and videos. As I noted, a lot of the work goes in ahead of time. A lot of that work is in the discussion guide preparation, and I prepared one here as well. So if I click here, this is going to now bring in the discussion guide that I prepared ahead of time. Basically, all this is a set of messages and questions that I can send by just clicking a button as I go through it. Generally, people will deviate from this live when you're running them, but this is a good way to ensure that the conversation is going to kind of be structured and how you want to have it. And specifically when there is diplomatic considerations, sometimes there is requires for approval, or there's some debates that need to happen over word choices and things and the questions that you might ask in the dialogue. I'm sure you are all familiar with. Few other things to note here before we start. One is that we can, before the conversation or during the conversation or after the conversation, define different segments of the population so that we can see results broken down by those segments. Before our conversation here, I went ahead and built a bunch of these segments just so that we can look at them. But let's say if I wanted to build one that was going to be people who were less than 35 and male and Democrat, then I could do that, and I'll call this my less than 35 male Democrats. And it's going to dynamically build that for me, and you'll see how we use that here in just a minute. The last thing is that generally running a live Remash dialogue is not a single player game, it's a multiplayer game. So there are generally more than one person involved. To make that a little easier, we have this thing we call the Backroom. And the Backroom, basically any element that's being communicated during the conversation, you can either just start to say like, hey, this is something I wanted to highlight, or you can start commenting on it. And this becomes a mode of facilitation back and forth between usually like a decision maker and then maybe an analyst who has their hands on the keyboard, and in some cases like TV producers if it's being live broadcasted. All right, so our conversation is now live. I'll note these are 54 strangers off the internet, so I cannot be held accountable for what they might say. And we'll try and have a PG conversation here. So I'll note we get their demographic data right away as they come in. So we know the breakdown of our folks here. So we know they lean Democrat, and we know that almost half of them are vaccinated and boosted. And now I'm going to start sending messages to them. So let's start. I just want to welcome everyone. I've learned it's actually important that you treat humans like humans, not subjects, when doing these dialogues. So welcome them and tell them I'm going to show them a few things to start getting them thinking about the future. So I will share a picture of, I think, what the future might look like. I will share a picture of what my grandmother keeps telling me the future will look like, and that I hope actually is real. A future of that I hope is not what the future looks like. And lastly, a version of the future I do hope is what the future looks like, which is sustainable farms on international space stations. All right, so that is just to get people thinking. And this generally you'll see at the beginning of many of these dialogues, there's a let's get to know each other. Let's not dive right into hard questions. Let's create a atmosphere where people feel drawn in and willing to be themselves. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is just ask a poll because I want to start with something simple. So I'm just going to ask people a poll question. Do you think the future will be better than the present? And so you get a sense of what it's like as a participant. I'll go back over here as a participant and see, I see this as a chat, and I'm going to say, of course, I think the future will be better than the present. That is what motivates everything that I do. So nothing fancy here, no AI. We just asked a poll question as part of this dialogue. And I'll note a few things right off the bat. So one is if we go to analyze, we can now look at this across those segments. So if I wanted to, I could break this down and start looking at results by Democrat, Independent, or Republican, which for those of you not in the US, those are our two political parties, and Independent is the catch-all other. Or I could branch from this poll and actually spawn into asking two different things to two different segments here based on how they're answering to a poll. I'm going to do none of those things. Instead, I'm going to ask an open-ended question. And let's make the duration of this just a little bit longer to give people time. So I'm going to ask this question. If people come together and the government really does its job well, what do you think the future can look like? So I'm going to click send on this one. That's going to go out. And now people are going to be able to start typing in their responses and voting. So I'm going to actually now go back to being a participant so that you can see what it's like to be one of those people typing in their responses and voting. So here I am. If people come together and the government does its job well, what do you think the future can look like? Here as well, I will publicly expose my biases. I think the future will have nearly unlimited green energy thanks to solar and nuclear, and that we will be arguing about when we will become a type 2 civilization. Type 2 civilization being uses all energy from the sun. So now I'm going to submit my answer, and this is now where the voting starts. So I now see answers from other people, and in some cases, I'm going to agree or disagree with them. So here they said, I mean, there's hope we can turn things around. With every year, I feel like there's a diminishing chance of that happening. Too much hate in the world, too much money controlling things. There's pessimism there. I'm going to say I disagree with that. Income equality and fairness, say I do agree with that. Climate change is mitigated, pollution and environmental destruction is reduced, poverty and hunger reduced, democracy actually functions correctly, free healthcare for all. So yeah, I'm hopeful of that one. So I'm just going to click through these real quick to show you the other type of voting that will happen, which is binary choice. So we sample some of this agree or disagree, and then some of these where we ask, which of these two responses do you prefer? So diversity and inclusion, less focus on race, versus we can preserve this environment to last far into the future. Tough one. I'm actually going to say I can't decide. And Andrew, I agree with both. Yeah.
Just a quick question that a number of us have. Where do you get your participants from? How are they joining this?
So in this case, I just used Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is where I can recruit strangers from the internet to participate in a task. So you can think of it as like a panel of sorts. That is not how you would do it in the context of a collective dialogue for conflict or inclusivity. But for the purpose of this demo, that's where I got them from.
Could you repeat that again? It's the Amazon
Mechanical Turk.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So it's basically, think of an online panel that you might use for market research or crowdsourced tasks. And it's not, I'm just using it for the purpose of demo. I would not recommend it be used for your guys, what you're doing. All right, so now I want to go back and show you the results of this question. So note everyone now voted, including myself. And now we're going to show a few things. So I'll start here. So this is, we're going to show common topics. So we see people mentioning poverty, healthcare, see people mentioning living, environment, equal, climate change. And if I want, I can click on one of these and see all of the actual verbatims, the things that people wrote that were about this particular topic. If I go into analyze, now I'm going to actually see something that is similar to what we saw with the poll question. So I'm actually going to be able to see for every one of the verbatims, and there are a lot of them, we're going to quantify the fraction of this segment that we will have predicted to agree with it. So in this case, looks like we've got a lot of similarities here, although I know if I rank maybe by independent, we'll find some of the oddities, which is people will be treated fairly with respect. There seems to be a little bit of variation. I'll also caveat, this is only 70 people and there's only 14 people per segment, so you should assume quite large error bars in general. But the idea is it lets you look here. So I noted, like when we've done these in Libya, there are well-defined ethnic lines or cultural lines where the answers are very different, and it's really important to understand them as individual entities rather than amalgamating them all together, and that's where this will get used. Otherwise, you might just click all and go, let's look at the things that the most people agreed with. Here they noted everybody will be prosperous and live long, healthy, happy lives. That is the thing that the most people agree with. I'll copy that because I'm going to use it here in a second. I'll note there's kind of other lot fancier things you can do if you just want to see, say, what people under 35 said and what Republicans most agreed with among there, you can, but I think those details are maybe not super important here. And then the last thing I'll show is just highlights, which I noted these are like those representative quotes. So if you don't want to read through all 70 or 80 of these responses, this gives you a subset here. It looks like about 10 or so, where these are the most representative verbatims. And then this number, which is how many people would have this verbatim as their number one thing. Not would they agree or disagree, but would they prefer it over everything else that's in this set of representative quotes. So all of these are signals to get a sense of what is representative of this group that you're communicating with live. And I'll note, because it's live, I'm going to just say thanks for the thoughtful responses. And then I'm going to follow up by asking them another question, which is, many of you agreed that it would look like a prosperous one. What does that actually mean? And so this is often what you'll see, which is I just learned something, but then it's sort of the thing that everyone agrees on might be a set of phrases that has some nuance that needs to be pulled a little further. And so in this case, I'm asking people to tell me more about what they meant by this thing that they all agreed on, which is people living prosperous lives. What does prosperous mean to them? And I'll show you this just as it comes in. What you'll see here will be first, this is now kind of my live stream of responses as people are typing them in. Common topics will start populating, but it won't have much, but it will kind of live update as people's responses come in. And then analyze will actually, we retrain and repredict every 6 seconds as results come in. Mainly, this is just people generally want a sense of directionality even before things are done. But I'll note, obviously, the results change as we get more votes and more data coming in here. So before I go on, I'll pause here. Any questions related to specifically to what you've seen so far?
There are a few questions from the audience here. Chip, do you want to ask yours?
Yes, it would help if I unmuted myself. So Andrew, my background several iterations ago is in polling. And so I've got 2 questions. First is, have you thought of this as an alternative to conventional focus groups, which is probably off topic for this group? But second, I didn't see price points on your website. What would it cost for a peacebuilding NGO to use a service like this?
Yeah, two good questions. So I'll note our commercial business is basically built on people replacing focus groups and surveys with using this. So good intuition. That is how we make our money. On pricing, I'll note that I could quote our commercial pricing, but for the purpose of anyone using us for peacebuilding, we either give it away or give it away at cost, depending on what you're doing with it, because it aligns with our mission. So that's not where we aim to generate revenue from. We generate revenue from giant companies who pay us tons of money because they want to understand their employees or customers. And then we use that so that we can give it away or give it away at cost to folks who will use it for peacebuilding. So if you want to use it for market research not related to peacebuilding, let's chat, and it actually costs money. If it's peacebuilding, let's chat, and we make sure that price won't ever prohibit.
And does that count also for the United Nations work you've done?
Yep, yeah, absolutely. So we, whenever they're using us for peacebuilding, so all the missions I'll talk through, our lawyers might tell me it's pro bono or donated or something formal, but it's no money gets exchanged is the key part.
And then we have another question from Lily. Would you like to come on, Lily?
Oh, yes. Hi. This is really fascinating. I'm curious, how many languages are supported by this platform? And could you, for instance, run a regional dialogue across multiple languages at the same time? Which I know is a pretty complicated, potentially complicated question, but one that is kind of important for some of the regional peacebuilding programs that we run.
Yeah, great questions. So first, let me actually I don't know the answer to this, but I think that oh no, I can't actually go in and click it. We're in about, we have two versions of our algorithm, one of them which works using language, the other which uses statistical inference that's not dependent on language. So in that way, we can basically do any language, but the common topics will be they are no longer topics, they're just like keyword counts. I think we're in about seven of the world's largest languages by unit of number of humans who speak that as their primary language. The top 7 are natural language algorithm works on, and then after that, we've translated our platform into, I think, about 27 to 30 other languages. So that it can run in those other languages, including kind of different dialects. I'll note the question you asked, which is, can you run a conversation with one dialogue in multiple dialects? The answer is sort of. If all participants speak the same dialect or speak the various dialects, then yes, because recall, they're going to be voting on what each other says. So as long as they can understand each other, then it works. I'll note that there are cases, and we've actually not done this in a peacebuilding context, but our customers have done this, where they will run the same discussion guide 3 different times in 3 different languages. And then we can actually take those and merge them into one data set. And believe it or not, we can predict across languages. So we can predict what a person who voted and responded in one language would have voted on a response coming in a different language. We're publishing a paper on this as we speak, because it's a cool nuanced thing of its own, but that's how we would recommend doing it if you were going to have it be in languages where the participants could not understand each other. Otherwise, we've done, I think most of our work in the Middle East is in a non-standard dialect of usually Arabic. So we've done a few flavors of that, and a few where there's kind of cross dialect within the same conversation, but where everyone could understand each other. We've not tried one where, say, there's people who speak other languages and don't understand each other, because the assumption is it won't work. Or at least the votes, it won't be meaningful. The tech works, but it's not a person's vote on something they don't understand. It's not a meaningful piece of information. Awesome. All right, I'm going to thank everyone here, and I'm going to give them a code, which is how we say thank you, which is we pay them $1 or $2 for their time participating. And I'm going to end our conversation. This is my email if you need. I did this just so that you can show now it's done. There's a few things I can do now that the conversation's done. Obviously, the first one is I can export the raw data as CSVs. There's multiple flavors of these. So I think even if I click this, we sort it and order it in different ways. So depending on how you like to do your analysis, if you like raw data, if you want something to send out quickly, you can quickly download a PowerPoint. We let you pick up to 3 segments, and then we'll generate a report of the results across those 3 different segments. And then this, we just launched like a week ago, so hopefully it works, which is basically a new set of analysis capabilities on the platform. So for example, you can go through and start building out more complicated ways of slicing and dicing the data and merging things together. So we basically took a lot of what we saw people doing in Excel spreadsheets and started pulling it onto our platform. Yeah, here's where we have things like searches or the stards or common topics that give you topics that are across the whole conversation. I won't go into tons of details here because I've learned it's very different in terms of how everyone's going to want to use the results afterwards, but I'll just note that there is a suite of increasingly sophisticated post-session analysis tools that you can use in addition to what's already in there live, which is kind of all of this percentage agree, the representative verbatims, the quantified quotes, and then the results broken down by different segments. So maybe the last thing to note, and sometimes relevant, is we have fairly sophisticated privacy and sharing. So we get used both in this context and in government contexts where you want people to observe but not touch, or broadcast but not be able to communicate. And so you can set all of that up as well, depending on your configuration. All right, so I'll kind of pause there. I see a hand up. I'll take a question, and then I've got some more slides, but they're mainly just to facilitate maybe some questions. So.
Yeah, hi, Andrew. This is Lena from Search. This is really fantastic. It sounds like every question we ask you to be like, yes, that's possible. So let me try. So the participants don't see any of the results, but is it right that if you wanted to, you could give them some visibility? Because again, a focus group of more extractive data is different than a dialogue where you're being like, hey, are we reaching consensus? And is that true?
Yeah, you got it. So actually, this is
you'd say yes.
Yeah, so this is I'll note it's actually a switch. It's an option we turn on for depending on people's use case. We have some hardcore researchers in a commercial world who absolutely do not want any results exposed for reasons of bias and groupthink. So there's different schools of thought. In this case, we always want to leave it on. We've found over and over again, people are more honest and more engaged if you if you expose them to some sampling of what you're learning along the way. So in this case, I get it in 2 flavors. So you note I can see on the answer that I gave, it'll actually show me what fraction of overall participants agreed with it. And if I click this, this is effectively the representative subset of those verbatims and what the agreement was on those, with mine slotted in terms of where it belongs. So again, this is in a dialogue setting, we always recommend this. UN always uses this, but there are some hardcore researchers. Chip, you might have a thought on that, which is there's arguments of bias. We've not been able to measure it, but there's good arguments as to why you might want to not do that in some settings. So yeah, does that answer your question? Awesome. Cool. All right. I'm going to go back to my slides here just a little bit. So this was kind of, I wanted to show you the platform overall. Note we haven't talked much about it in the context of peace building, other than here's how it works when you do a live conversation. So kind of few notes here. So Chip, this one's for you. So this is actually all the things that Remesh is used for. And this is the one that we're digging in and talking about right here, which is used for peace building, and policy development is kind of the very close sister we see of it. Our work on this, though I noted quite literally, I founded Remash because this was the use case I was really thought needed a lot of help. It wasn't until about 2018 that we actually made any progress on this. We worked with the UN for about 2 years leading up to 2019 doing two things. One was building trust in the algorithms. No, we're using machine learning, and machine learning is something that you all should, by nature, as a starting point, not trust, right? So that should always be the starting point, and it's the UN's as well. And so we set out to go, how do we earn their trust? Short version, we work on an academic work together where they ask really hard questions, and we actually test the algorithms in the ways that they would want to see them tested. So this is a poster from a paper we published together, and I can share the actual paper itself to anyone who's interested, where we go through and test the algorithm, what the prediction accuracy is, and then relate prediction accuracy to confidence in aggregate statistics, because those are really what you get. When you say % agree, that is a summation over a bunch of predicted data. And so it's a nuance on how this relate. That was the first thing. That's actually, I would say, that one I knew was coming and was an important one, and we still do flavors of that to this day. The second part of that, why it really took 2 years, was about process and understanding how to actually run one of these in a way that manages the stakeholders and the risks appropriately. There are obviously a lot of risks when doing it that are outside of just the technological risks. Are the people who they say they are? Is the group we're engaging with representative? Did we ask questions that are the right flavor? Did we ask questions that are going to make diplomats angry and actually set something back? So there's kind of this whole scope of things that we had to develop a process with the UN before we could even run the first one of these. Before I go into kind of talking through any of them, I just wanted to note it all ends up being summarized something like this in terms of the execution process. So while I showed you the run dialogue part, which is where all the fun happens, the work that happens before and after is a not insignificant component of it. So the first part is basically setting a date for a dialogue, or dates if you're going to do a sequence of dialogues, and then inviting participants to it. Right now on our platform, we give you a link and people will invite them through a wide various set of means. They'll treat it as an event and basically invite people to that event. We actually, before the quarter's over, we're building a tool on our platform to make that easier. But right now, it's a link just like it was a Zoom link, and you would invite people to it in the same way you would invite them to a Zoom link. The second part, and this is where a lot of the work sits, is the design of the dialogue itself. You don't just go into it blind, you prepare a discussion guide. And the preparation of that discussion guide is where the hardest work, the hardest collaboration, that is where kind of all the forces actually meet. Generally found is the process basically starts with what are the macro objectives. You align people on the super high level objectives. Is the objective purely to get inclusivity? Is the objective to get inclusivity but get some intelligence? Is the objective to find points of consensus that can be used as part of an actual ongoing ceasefire negotiation? And they want to understand what terms are likely to get buy-in from different sides. So depending on those starting goals, then they work backwards to decide, here's what we want to ask to get information about them. And then, at least in the UN cases, then there's an approval process where the person who is leads the mission, leads that particular mission from the UN, kind of signs off on all of them. And usually there's some wording tweaks because word choice in this context is at least perceived to matter, or it does matter. That tends to be about a time scale ranging from, I think the fastest I've seen these pulled off is about 2 or 3 days. If you don't want it to be crazy fast, it often will be more like a week or 2. Just for that prep process, which is where all of it comes in. But as fast as you can create the discussion guide and invite people, you can do it. Then running the dialogue you all have seen. I'll give a few more examples of how those tend to work in practice, noting that Remash is not the only piece of tech that people will usually use while a Remash is being run. And then they'll analyze report results. What that means, again, it ranges depending on what you're doing. Sometimes it's purely to inform internal decision-making. That's one side of the spectrum. The other side is it will actually be used to write up a report that is made and solicited to the public as a way of establishing ground truth on, like, this is what people really think. That's usually in contexts where there are bad actors attempting to claim that the public thinks a thing that is counter to what the public actually thinks. So again, it ranges depending on which one of those scenarios you find yourself in. All right, so let me just blaze through a few of these, and I'll note at this point, you can cut me off and jump in and ask questions. I want to just give a few examples of real world scenarios. Yeah, Felix.
Yes, hi, thank you very much. That's so interesting. I have one question regarding the ICT infrastructure that is required to use this service. So first of all, what devices are used? I mean, is it possible only to connect via a computer or also via mobile phones? And the bandwidth. I mean, does it function like, you know, on very low bandwidth, or is it required to have good internet connectivity?
Yeah, good questions. So I'll note from a moderate, so the one person moderating, generally you can do it on a phone. It's a little wonky, as you noted, because there's these different screens. So moderation, we would recommend you do on a laptop or a desktop connected to okay internet. It's mainly text going back and forth, so it's not high bandwidth, but it's a modern application. Participants is very different story. So we've optimized the participant experience with the goal of it being able to run on any phone that renders JavaScript and has a bandwidth of at least 2G. So they're not dumb phones, as they call them, right? So not ones that it's just pure SMS type stuff, but slow phones that are connected to slow internet, but nonetheless have internet. So we've tested these in Iraq and Yemen on 2G networks is what we've used as our kind of testing ground to make sure it works. To be honest, though, we've not tested on every single phone. We've not tested on every single network, but in general, like we know that on a really cheap phone on 2G is the bare minimum and it will work, though obviously it's a little snappier if it's faster, but we've run real conversations in those contexts.
Great, thank you so much.
Yep. Julie.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Andrew. I'm just thinking through use cases and seeing this as like most relevant in things like national consultations. I'm wondering if you've seen sort of a cutoff point in terms of scale where another tool for dialogue or another dialogue process makes more sense. Say if you have under 100 people, or if you have over 500 people or whatever, if you have any kind of indication on where the value added of this, of the natural language processing and, you know, consensus voting and all of that becomes like most beneficial.
Yeah, it's a great question. The general guideline we give is if you could have the conversation with everyone in a room or in a Zoom and it not divulging the chaos, you should do that instead. That, you know, the value that comes from like 7 people talking literally in voice and video or in person, that is higher than what you would get if those same 7 people were on Remash. So that threshold can be argued. Is it 7 people? Is it 15 people? It's definitely probably not 30 or 40 people. So somewhere in there is where I would say below that number. I would say no value add from Remash other than maybe the veil of anonymity. So we have seen it used in those cases purely when they're wanting to get some anonymous input. I'll call that a weird edge case use. That's not where the core value prop comes in. From a scale perspective, really the value basically goes up with scale. So the value provides is higher with more and more people, which then is to say, where does our system crash and break down because we can't handle that many people? There's a few flavors of this number. We've pushed it up to about, in a live session, we've certainly done like 1,000 plus. Our engineers tell me theoretically we could push 5 or 10,000, but we've not actually had that many people in a live conversation. We also, people can run these sessions asynchronously. So I showed the live version, but if you want, you could build that discussion guide, set it to asynchronous, and then people could come and participate at their own pace on their own time. And those we've actually tested up to about 5,000 in the real world with real people doing them and know that it scales there. So there's no reason we could go scale higher, but our engineers have only tested up to a certain scale because that's what people have asked us to be able to do. So yeah, so maybe that's a very long-winded way of saying approximately like 30 to 5,000 is what I would consider the operating envelope. for us.
Andrew, this is Jennifer. I am unfortunately unable to raise my hand, so I apologize for interrupting. How do we get in touch with you?
Yeah.
If we're interested in utilizing your service.
Yeah, good question. Probably two ways. One is ping Lisa and she will connect you to me. The other is my email is andrew@remesh.org. Let me just actually.
I'll share it out with you. So I just want to make sure we can get through the rest of your slides. So let's.
Awesome. Yeah.
I'm sorry, real quickly, because I'm going to have to leave for another meeting.
Andrew@remesh.org.
And that's REMESH.
Yep, that's right.
Right. Thank you so very much. This is fantastic.
Yeah, my pleasure. Chip, one last question from you, and then I'll kind of go through a few more slides here. Oh.
You would think after 8 years I would remember to unmute. Maybe you'll get to this in your slides. If not, figure out a way to do it. But most use cases I'm thinking of would be asynchronous.
Yep.
And comments on how this would be used that way would be helpful, but we can do that offline too.
Cool. Yeah, I'll note it's like live but easier is how everyone describes it. So it's the similar prep to live, except the dynamic change your questions on the fly as you learn information part isn't there. Instead, you're generating a link, you're sending it out, people do it at their own pace. You open it for a participation window. Otherwise, the results look the same. The setup looks the same. Everything is the same. It's just the modality of participation is different. Yeah. All right. So let me just talk through a few of these. So a few lessons learned in each of these. I'll race through these. So Yemen was a lesson in dialects. That there were different dialects. We had to switch models and learn take our non-language based model and get that ready to go. Other lesson learned is the importance of having the right person in the room. So this is where we learned, we did actually a few of these. The one where we actually had the person in charge of the UN mission to Yemen in the room informing what questions got asked next was where it was the most successful. That's where they learned the most and everyone was the most engaged. However, what I'll note is Yemen, I would not call a success from a macro standpoint so far. And so kind of the lesson there is this tool alone actually doesn't solve things. It has to be used in the broader context of a peace building process. And in this case, it helped in micro ways here and there, but it's not a blunt force instrument that can overcome kind of the more nuances of the process. This is just to give you a sense of what these tend to be like in person. They're usually a room full of the people who are involved. And it's a little high energy, let's say, as the conversation evolves. Second case here is Libya. This one has been ongoing now for about 2 years. So I'll note kind of various parts of the peace building process. This one, I learned, we kind of applied the lessons from Yemen to this one. And sprinkled in what I would call a little bit of luck, which was that they were already prepping for a peace dialogue in person with kind of the key people, the key individuals. And so that was already lined up. And what they decided to do was start to run a set of these collective dialogues on Remesh in parallel to those ones that were already happening. And that meant that the learnings that they would get from that, they could directly feed. Like they would have a Remesh in the evening, the next morning, they could take those learnings and they could inform the actual kind of negotiation process that would happen with a much smaller group of people the next day. So we're the right cog in the right machine in that context. The second piece that happened in Libya, it was an accident. Since then, we've learned to do it purposefully, is that they decided to live stream it on, I think, their Facebook, just for the purpose of inclusivity. And a national broadcast picked it up. And sort of if you've seen like sportscasters talking about a game or election people talking as results come in, there were talking heads narrating as the conversation unfolded. And that built a ton of awareness among the public of it. It drove a ton of participation. And I would say it increased the leverage that they got out of the conversation, because now it provided some legitimacy and kind of weightiness to how bought in the general public was to wanting a peace deal to come. And in parallel, obviously things started going viral on Twitter as people screenshotted the results. So I think, I forget who asked of showing participants' results. We did show participants' results here, and they screenshotted them, put them on Twitter, and they would go viral. And that produced a lot of the right types of pressures so that the situation that was already constructed, which was these in-person dialogues among the kind of key stakeholders on different sides of the conflict, could actually use it in a useful way, and in this case led to at least an initial ceasefire as part of that. Since then, they've now used us kind of in the backside of the peace building process. So not just for ceasefire negotiation, but then used to determine what they wanted to evaluate their interim government officials on. So they were going to select an interim government. So they had dialogues to decide, to hear from the people about what was the criteria they wanted to evaluate them on. I won't comment on how all of that played out quality-wise, but and then kind of as that process has evolved, even as of like 2 weeks ago, had another one. So they've kind of just had a constant cadence of these as a way of keeping the public included and involved in this very dynamic process of trying to establish a new government. Yeah, John.
I was just wondering if you have any case studies or white papers that go into greater detail about how Remesh gets used over the course of a broader peace building project that would be available for us to read.
Fortunately, at the moment, nothing that is formal and published. So there are a few internal UN documents that I believe I can share that have kind of documented the macro process that wraps around it. But this is something that is actually on our list of things to do. Because as I noted, we're a cog in a broader machine, and how we fit into that broader machine, I think in general, is the difference between success and failure. It's less about, is our tech awesome or not, and more like, did it get pieced in? Even so much as noting here, we tend to be used alongside other technologies. So we're not like the only technology used in one of these dialogues. We're maybe where it's taking place, but this is an actual screenshot from a dialogue in Libya, I think a couple weeks back. And you'll note there are 1, 2, 3, 4 other pieces of technology being used simultaneously to ours. There's a live Zoom, which is what everyone is on, just like we are, to actually replace that table with a bunch of people at it, which didn't work due to COVID. There's a WhatsApp group, which is one of the main ways that they have recruited participants. So they kind of do this double layering of WhatsApp groups that are connected to NGOs on the ground that span the different parties of stakeholders so that they can get a decent mix of people across that distribution. And then they pair it with Twitter as a way to basically live, to let people know it's happening, invite them to participate, live tweet it as it's happening to drive more engagement. And then there's also the Remash where people are having the dialogue. And so it's kind of all of these things working together that makes for a successful one. If you were to just use Remash, it would be much less awesome, I suspect. You have to use all of the tools together. So I just wanted to point that out because we're a cog in a cog, not even. So we're like a piece of the piece, if you consider the collective dialogue the piece there. Few other notes. So I wanted to point out Iraq because this was, in my mind, we had a failure here, and I think those are good to learn from. So the failure here was extremely low participation, and at least in the first couple of these. So this led us to ask why. We learned 2 things. One was that there was a lot of nervousness by everyone involved in running it. Thus, they avoided any public discussion of the fact that it was happening. They avoided putting it through some of their social media channels. And then they scheduled it during a soccer game, during a football match. And all of those things led to very low participation. Contrast that with the case of Libya, where Stephanie Williams went on national TV and said, "Hello, Libya, I would like to have a conversation with you," and then gave them the invite, right? So little bit of risk mitigation actually can go the wrong way in this case. So if you want to be inclusive, then you have to be open about it, I think was the lesson there. Lisa, yeah.
So I'm wondering what happens in terms of trolling, hate speech, how have you designed the affordances to try to control that?
Yeah, so I'll say there's no magic bullet we've found there. It's like a bunch of different things we do in parallel to try and address it. One is trying, so the first is getting as much as you can, getting real humans who are the right ones in. And that we found the best solution is we call Blitz Invite. So when we actually invite people to participate, we don't give them the actual session link. We ask them to sign up or to denote their interest. And then it is like 2 minutes before the session starts, we blast everyone with the link. Why do we do this? We learned that generally where trolls come from, trolls are second order nodes in that network of people. The first order nodes are all kind of the right ones. The trolls happen when they share it with their friend. And we've even, like, you can even get to a government, and then you can get government actors on. So we've learned the best way is actually blitz recruits. It's actually pretty elegant, but it works really, really well. The second is, though, even if you get the right people there, you'll still have some people who are, let's call it frustrated with whatever the situation is and have things to say. And this is where I'll note that I would almost call it a feature, not a bug in that case, which is that people feel as though they can speak their minds, which didn't come for free out of the box. We had to work really hard so that people in certain regimes felt comfortable speaking honestly about their perceptions of their government or their leadership. But if those perceptions are not held by the group, then because we show here's what people agree with in that summary section, they will see that among those are not those highly divisive or those radical opinions. So that's radical opinions, not trolls. There have been instances of just pure trolls, people just saying like cats are really cute and fluffy as a response to how do we improve like the security of our airports. I would say there's not a solution to it other than some people will see it and vote on it. Almost always people will not agree with it, or they will choose other things over it. And as a result, the algorithm pushes it down and it's not shown as part of results. So that's kind of like all of those things. And I guess we actually have a profanity filter, which we can flip on. It's not trained in every language. And I'll note that British English was one of the most challenging ones to figure out all the profanity for, but we do have it. We tend to advise it being off for these because we want a strong bias towards truth and willing to accept some people might say unpleasant things in return for making sure no one's voice is suppressed. But that switch is there should someone decide to use it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I know some folks will have to leave because we're at the hour. Do you have time to stay for a few more minutes?
Yeah, I can probably stay. I have a hard stop at 12:15 my time, so I've got about 10 more minutes.
All right. So thank you for those coming and are needing to leave now, but let's stay on the line to have a few more. So we have some Lily on the chat and then Godwin and Felix here with their hands raised.
Awesome. Let me pull the chat up. Yeah. So quick answer, I think, Lily, which is about getting the right respondents. And this is like market research 101. Make sure you have a representative sample, know what representative means. In our case, there is not a one size fits all approach we found to work. The general best approach we found is, and when I say we, really the UN has kind of pioneered this. They partner with organizations on the ground, and by on the ground, I quite literally mean like geographically, within the regions that they want to get people from. They get the buy-in from the leaders of those organizations, and then that they will send the invites to those leaders to send to their people. And it's especially in regions that have like low internet penetration or where there's like a lot of confounding factors that can make it hard to sample the right population. We found that that's the most robust. Now, it's never perfectly balanced. So like you might get more people from one region than the other, which is why the ability to segment becomes so important, so that you can look at them kind of apples to apples and rebalance if you need to across those different segments. In cases of getting diasporas, which we have done, it actually tends to be the same. The difference is that instead of it being like an on-the-ground organization that distributes water somewhere, it will be a national, international organization that has a list of people that kind of range over that diaspora. And again, it's usually best not to be one organization, but like a set of organizations that span the different reach that people want to get. Last thing I'll note that we've actually seen sometimes is people will just use, like we did this once in India. We just used an actual polling company that would do caddy calls, which are like computer assisted telephone interviews, and had them actually like manually go out and invite a sample of people because they wanted to help on the work. And so we did it that way as well. Yeah, so it's a long-winded way of saying, unfortunately, no silver bullet there, but you do have to be very wise in the context of your scenario to get a good enough representative set of people. There's a lot of ways to do it wrong. Goodwin.
All right. Thank you very much, Andrew. This far, I've learned quite a lot of new innovative way. Just to also understand how do we incorporate or mainstream conflict sensitivity approach to this way of dialogue. I just share a little example. I heard you talk about also issues around the possibility of the use of WhatsApp group also to promote that. So in Nigeria, just recently, through a WhatsApp group platform, there had been increasing growing tension of religion intolerance as a result of an alleged blasphemous statement that was stated in a WhatsApp group by one of a student who is actually leaked at the moment because she was deceased as a result of what she had said. I've not had time to go through what she has said, but then I'm saying that in large group as such, also using technology, how do you deal with issues of conflict sensitivity? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So this is where I'll note I'm not an expert. So the best that I can do is like share what I've seen smart people working on this do. But again, I asterisk, not an expert. In general, in the context of doing a inclusivity dialogue, I've seen two approaches. One approach is to basically have two separate dialogues, where those dialogues are with two separate subsets of the population, where you basically almost think of splitting them by sensitivity. With this group, they're not going to be overly sensitive to this topic, and we can talk directly about it. With this group, they will be, and we're going to have to be careful or talk about a different topic. So that's going to approach number one. Approach number two that I've seen is the let's be very careful in our wording approach, paired with empathy. So what I mean by that is that imagine a 60-minute dialogue, and in there you want to ask a question about something that is extremely sensitive, that everyone is very passionate about, to put it friendly. The approach that we've seen work best is if that's a 60-minute conversation, you spend 45 minutes of the conversation reminding everybody that they are humans, exchanging things that are interesting, talking about the topics that everyone can come together on. There was a really, it gives me chills actually thinking about it. There was this moment in one of the dialogues in Yemen where there was a very contentious issue being discussed. And the person on the mission there went, actually guys, let's back up. Let's ask them what they view as the future for Yemen. And someone wrote the response, we want our children to live in a world without conflict. Everybody agreed with it from every one of those sides. And it totally shifted the nature of the entire conversation from adversarial to like, oh, wow, you want that for your kids too. We're gonna like work together to make it happen. And so I think that's the maybe more bold, but I would actually argue maybe more effective approach, which is you spend the first 3/4 of the interaction or the dialogue simply finding middle ground on non-sensitive issues to give space to then ask the sensitive issue in a context where people have like built a little bit of empathy for each other. the dynamic, I'll note again, I'm not an expert. There's like people smart in psychology who design those discussion guides and do it in really clever ways. But yeah, those are the two flavors I've seen that.
And last, yeah, Felix.
Yes, thanks. I have one question regarding entrance barriers. So it seems that the level of literacy, of course, digital literacy needs to be quite high to actually participate. And of course, if you want to include a broad range of people, then there are different levels of that literacy. And, you know, answering these questions in written form on a computer is difficult for people. So are you thinking, I mean, how you tackle this? And are you thinking about like introducing different features in the future? Like, I don't know, automated speech recognition or something to tackle that problem?
Yeah, great question. Two answers to it. One is the way that we approach it right now is to like acknowledge it, to know when we're dealing with a subset of a population which has either low internet penetration or low technical literacy. And technical literacy, I mean, all the stuff needed to participate. That can be reading and writing, or it can also just be comfort with a phone. And in those cases, we try and find the best proxies we can. And unfortunately, that's as precise as of a definition as we can give, but it's like, who are the people in that subset who are aligned, for all intents and purposes, aligned in representing them, and can we get them? It's not a great solution, but it's like the best we can do right now. We just, in a hackathon 2 weeks ago, we built a audio version of our platform. So effectively one that is 100% audio based. There is no buttons, there is no clicking. The thing I'll note for it, the bandwidth requirements are much higher. And so there's, though that means maybe more people could participate because it's audio based, the amount of bandwidth required to stream audio back and forth on a device is much higher than the bandwidth required to stream text data back and forth on a device. And so there's maybe a little misbalance. My hope, or the optimistic view, is that you know, as we progress into the future, bandwidth limits will increase. Probably also technical literacy will as well. And that should mean that, you know, the text-based approach opens up to more, but simultaneously, maybe we can actually start offering the audio-based approach in the areas where people have low literacy. Unfortunately, what we've run into is low technical literacy overlaps almost perfectly with low, like crappy internet, for lack of a more precise word. And thus, it's really challenging to find something that spans those two as a solution. So,
understood. Thank you very much.
Yep.
This has been just fantastic. So I think that we're hungry for any papers that you might have in these last minutes. If you can, or you could send the links to me, and Nick and I can make sure to send them out to everybody if that's easier.
Yeah, actually let me see if I can.
I think we've actually lost a lot of our participants already. So why don't we just plan on sending out the links afterwards? But really, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm from our community. This tool can help us in a variety of ways. So thank you so much for taking your time to come with us today.